They would say, well, what do you call common sense? Here's a phrase, common sense isn't so common. So what do you mean by they don't have common sense, Landon? How can these people so highly educated, we should esteem them so greatly because they went to Harvard or Yale, or these other Ivy League schools. Don't they know much more than we do? So why am I talking as if I'm condescending or I'm insulting them, calling them educated idiots? Yeah.
They might know a lot, but they don't necessarily think about what they know.
They might know a lot, but they don't really think. They would say the opposite. They would say they're the thinkers. And those of us that don't hold to their views, those of us that hold to a biblical worldview, we're the ones that don't really think from their perspective. Well, to live like there's no God makes you a fool, right? To say there is no God. A fool says in his heart, there is no God. So if you can use fool and idiot in the same vein, then educated idiot is pretty appropriate. And besides that, even if you took the spiritual realm out of it, even if you just spoke of things in their domain, like, okay, humanism's all there is. How are they doing with that? How's this working out? That they're, leave everything up to them. They'll socially engineer society. How's it going? If you just talk to them on their terms, in humanistic terms, and this is all there is, and our job should be about going about the business of making life the best it can be on earth, here, right now. How are they doing with that? Things going well? Oh yeah, so sitting here and we can modify our temperature in this room. We have all these great technological advancements, but really, how's things going? How much joy is there in the world? How are they doing with their secular, no spirit realm? How's everything working out for everybody? Excuse me if I'm starting to get a little upset the more I think about it. How's this life that they're trying to create for everybody working out? Everybody happy? Everybody joyful? America's not leading the world in pharmaceuticals because either you can't sleep, you got anxiety. Everything's just working out great, right? Nobody's having any mental issues in America. We don't lead the world in mental issues because they got it all. They're the highly educated. Just trust them. That's the world that they're creating. There's no wars. How's that working out? No wars? Oh, that's right. All the wars is because of religion. That's what they come back. Disease, physical diseases, those are all eradicated because, they're so smart. They got all those things figured out. No poverty. Millions of people aren't going to die this year in the world of starvation, malnutrition. But we're the problem. Those of us that stand firm in our faith and believe that there is a God in control, we're the problem with the world. Well, they've had control for how many generations now? And they continue to have a pretty strong hold, very strong hold on all of the systems that run their fantasy world with no God. The Humanist Manifesto, again, big deal. Oh, by the way, this guy, when I turn around and see the hands up and say, hey, I've heard of that name before because you've had U.S. history or civics. 1, 2, 3. John Dewey. John Dewey, okay, remember, history's more than dates and dead people. John Dewey, very influential. He was the leading crusader in that modern era, because now we're in the postmodern era. The modern era being the late 1800s into the early 1900s, with the impetus of after the Enlightenment and this humanist thinking dominating education. Well, he was the leading proponent of that, the father of modern public education. And the Humanist Manifesto, which maybe tomorrow we'll read excerpts of it. The purpose for that Humanist Manifesto was that they wanted to find a new purpose for religion. You know, everything should be based on science and inspiration of the human intellect. That's where your religious activities should go. You should pursue science and everything that we can achieve according to our human intellect. That's what you should take religiously. And humanism is a religion. They like to talk about religion being the cause of all problems as if they're not a religion. And what we're trying to do is have you understand and expose the fact that they are a religion. They do live according to a certain set of beliefs about God, about man, about how our relationship to God, even if it's none, or our relationship to each other, how we got here, where we're going. So this was done in 1933. By the way, if you remember U.S. history, and you know that things don't happen in a vacuum, and you think about this period of time in U.S. history called the Progressive Era, where there were two things going on, and they continue to keep stretching us, where we decided that we were not going to live according to the secular ideals presented in the Constitution, and we're also going to continue to walk away from the biblical principles and God's Word, and those things kind of happen simultaneously. You figuring that out? That in the American experience, at the same time we were walking away from God being the dominant idea, that the biblical worldview, the Christian worldview dominating culture, we were also walking away from the constitutional principles that built the greatest, most free country in the world, and free as far as religious freedom. That's the big thing. If you remember from U.S. history, the Revolutionary War didn't really start until all of the murmuring reached the pulpits. And you remember the video I showed you of Reverend Muhlenberg taking off his clerical black robe regiment, taking off his robe with his uniform underneath, saying there's a time to preach and a time to pray. There's also a time to fight. It was updated in 1973, and if you look, we're going to tell you there was a book written in 2000, but there was another Humanist Manifesto, Part 3. I think it was signed in 2003. There'll probably be another one for the next generation. Your generation, someone out there, some group will come up with another Humanist Manifesto. This is the way we see the world. To sum it up, secular humanism rejects God. Okay, I always try to make the notes say the most with the least amount of words. So all the words mean something. Secular humanism not just rejects God. They all got the freedom to do that, right? Everybody in this room's got the freedom at their peril to make the idiotic decision after everything you've been taught and you know, but your flesh doesn't want to agree with. You got the freedom to reject God, and that's all right. But that's not it. Secular humanism doesn't operate on just the idea that you as an individual can reject God. They want everyone to reject Him. They're not satisfied with individual liberty rejecting God. They desire total cultural rejection of Him. And that's why it's a battle. That's why if you're not ready for the battle, you're going to be defeated. If you're not putting on the full armor every day, you're exposing yourself. And you're living, I keep trying to tell you this, you're living in a time where if you're really not, and that's why we're emphasizing it so much, not that it was my plan, but with the chapel a couple weeks ago, with the constant bombarding you with maybe even trying to get you to question your faith. That's good. Because you need it needs to be cemented. It doesn't need to be something that's going to go with the wind. The first breeze, once you leave the safety and comfort and loving environment of your home and your school and your church, and you feel free, you're going to be destroyed if you're not ready. Because you're living in a time where you can't escape it. You just can't. Even families like mine, where I was dead set. No video games in my house. My kid's not going to have a cell phone until they're 18, and then it was 16. And with the first kid, it worked out pretty good. And then the second kid, Ben's the oldest. He's going to be like, by the time Grant's Ben's age, he's going to be like, what happened to my parents? Look at this kid's doing. It happens. Even those of us that are like, we know it. I teach it. I think about it more than probably 95% of the people. And it happens. It filters into our families. It filters into the church. It filters into pulpits. If we're not steadfastly, earnestly striving to defeat it, then you're going to lose the battle. There is, as the book I have back there, there is a battle for truth, and there is a secret battle about ideas. There's this, what's the other one called? Mind siege. Now, this is going to talk about something that's very much a hot topic today, so.
I chose Wix for my business because of its massive scope for functionality and
In a landmark ruling, the Supreme Court today legalized abortions.
This was the day, I forget the exact date, 1973, when the Supreme Court decided that, you know what, we got a legislative branch that makes laws, but we're just going to make a law ourselves. So the Supreme Court in 1973, out of whole cloth, decided that they were going to create the law in America that says abortion's legal. Thankfully, I guess a little less educated idiocy last year righted that idiotic decision because it didn't have the legal standing to make that decision. And now it's back to the states, and one of those states is Ohio. And Ohio, over the next 3 weeks, is going to be looked at by most of the country as, okay, this is a referendum on where we're at. After 2 generations of teaching and living in such a way that killing babies in their mother's wombs, if you can possibly imagine that anybody thinks that's good, that if that's been dominating the education, government, entertainment industry, that's perfectly okay. Can you imagine if we actually did turn the tide on that, like the sign last year was that the Supreme Court overturned it, and now it's back to the states, and here's Ohio front and center, that those of you that are able to vote are going to be able to cast your vote for life, because human beings are created in the image of God, and you've got the power with your one vote to cast a vote for that gift of life or against it.
Supreme Court abortions. Legalized abortions.
This is why abortion is still legal. Secularism. Secular humanism is the popular religion of our day. It's what's taught in our schools and propagated in the media. It says that man is the measure of all things. The universe is closed. There's no God, only time plus matter plus chance. Man determines his own reality, future, and ethics without reference to God. In a chaotic, ever-changing universe, science and reason rule the day. Few can doubt the influence of this ideology on the culture over the past 100 years. It's captured academia, politics, and even our pulpits. Autonomy is its chief virtue. Like the serpent in the garden, its central tenet is, you decide good and evil for yourself. How does this relate to the issue of abortion? Well, Christians are pro-life. Being for life is the scriptural position. The Bible alone provides the foundation for why life is valuable and why it must be protected. Human beings are made in God's image. He is the reference point. Without the triune God, there is no appeal to justice, only nature and nature's institutions. If the material world is all there is, human beings have nothing outside of them to ground their worth and dignity. Protecting the innocent is not a value that was given to us by secularism or atheism. We know this, but the problem is that many believers have adopted worldly doctrines and methodologies founded on man's wisdom rather than the truth of Scripture when it comes to this area. Many hold to a secular pro-life doctrine masquerading around in Christian clothes and Christian terminology. This is why they inconsistently apply God's word to this issue. The pro-life industry has an unbiblical view of the mom's natural condition. They say she's basically good. God says she's a rebel and hostile to his law. They say her problem is the circumstance outside of her. God says that the problem is within her. They say she's a victim that has immunity. God says she's guilty and must be held accountable. They say information and education are the answers, but God says that the gospel and a new heart are the answer. They say we need to protect babies by doing what works. God says to protect babies by doing what's right. They say we need to write laws that change based on the situation. God says you shall not murder, ever. They say the Supreme Court has spoken and must be obeyed no matter what. But God says we must obey him rather than men when we're commanded to do evil. Therefore, if abortion is to end, Christians must abandon secular humanism. Our message is Christ and Christ alone. If we teach a different message than Christ, we commit eternal murder. And if we link arms with others in ministry that have a different message than Christ, whether secular or otherwise, we become accomplices in the murder of souls. There is no neutrality. Christ is Lord over how we fight and end abortion. Abortion is wrong because God says it is. His word is the answer. As Christians, we must return to it.
So who's the audience? Who's the audience in that podcast, whatever you call it? Who's the audience, Andy? Who's the audience? Who's he talking to? Is he talking to? No. Who's he talking to? Christians. He was talking to Christians. He wasn't trying to persuade non-Christians. Unfortunately, there's a need to persuade Christians. If the people that profess Christianity, if all of those people would vote for life, then this would be a non-issue. We wouldn't have had to, in August, try to pass an emergency initiative or referendum to an issue in August to stop them from having to only have 50+1. Because the people that profess to be Christian are going to vote, of course they're going to vote no on this coming issue, because Christians don't support killing babies in their mother's womb. Or do they? When he says it filters into the pulpit, do you know of? Hopefully you don't go to one. Do you know there's churches that are pro-abortion? What? I'm sure you know that. Hopefully you're not affiliated with one. Pro-abortion, pro-sexual perversion. How's this happen? How does this stuff filter into the church? What would be the reason a Christian would be not pro-life? Anybody got one? Come on. Even if it's not your position, what would a Christian use as their reason that they would support killing babies in the mother's womb? Yeah. Right. So, as a loving person, you care about the other person, in other words, the mother, right? What does that position say about the baby then? That the baby's not worthy of your care? Because why? Because you can't see the baby? Is the baby human? At what point is the baby human? Come on, this is one of the major, one of the most popular radio voice in the history of America, probably then the history of the world. Predicted about 30 years ago that this might be the issue that sparks the next civil war in America, because this is how ferociously those who think it's a woman's right to kill the baby in her womb will fight to maintain that right. So obviously they don't think the baby is human, I guess. And then in their human heart they want to care for the mother. So at what point is the baby human? When you see it, is, again, going back to humanism, because you can see the baby, then that's more reality. Do you know how all this happened? Do you know how we've made inroads into ending and limiting abortions just in your lifetime? Is with the technology, with the ultrasounds, that you can now not just get the little fuzzy little black and white image that I got with my children, that you really have to focus and see a image of a baby, and now you can see the baby like as the baby is in the mother's womb. That has stopped a lot of abortions, because seeing is believing, right? And when you can show the mother, this is why we support places that, pro-life places that have women pregnancy centers where they can educate women and teach them before they make this literally fatal mistake, and then a mistake that's going to haunt them, many of them, if they have a conscience at all, for the rest of their lives, that they can see the humanness of the baby at 2 months, 3 months. Okay, so one of the reasons someone might argue with you, and they might be a quote-unquote Christian because they care about people and they love people and they don't want that mother to suffer. Why would the mother suffer having a baby? What do you mean? How is the mother, other than birth, please, I'm not downplaying birth, I understand. But how is the woman suffering? What instances might they give? So it'd be inconvenient. How's that hold up for a biblical or Christian worldview? It's going to be inconvenient for you to have a child. I mean, it might affect your quote unquote happiness, right? So look, I don't think I'm convincing any of you, but you have to be the agents out there that are agents of truth, that your view in this case, for not just God's sake, but for the sake of babies, your view, we have to win. Besides the fact that actually caring about women, convincing especially young women that can't see the baby, and that, hey, it's going to be all right, you'll forget about it. Right. Until you avail yourself to all the stories about young women that were convinced to kill their babies in their womb, which should be the safest place in the world physically for a baby to be. And you hear the horror stories of what their lives have ended up. Because eventually, your conscience will catch up to you. See you soon. So, we want the mother to be happy. What are the major arguments that are out there for, hey, Christian, loving person? Don't you care about women? What are the major arguments for supporting abortion? Again, we have to convince Christians, unfortunately, because if the people that call themselves Christian would all vote biblically, this wouldn't even be an issue. We wouldn't have to worry that on November 7th, that Ohio would lead the way to making it so that, and it's, by the way, it goes beyond abortion, that Ohio would lead the way to a woman can just, out of convenience, kill the baby in her mother's, in her womb, up until birth or beyond. Because we know that that's a stance that non-Christians would take. So what's the arguments? Real quick. What are the standard arguments? Come on, you got to know what they are so you know how to speak to them. What are the standard arguments? Yeah. Okay, besides the convenience and life's going to be hard because you don't have enough money to, but what, yeah. Okay, rape. Don't you care about this victim of a horrific crime? And now you're going to make her pay again, right? You're going to make her live with the consequences of the crime that was committed on her. She's a victim. How does a Christian, loving person address that? Anybody? How do you?
Why are you going to take it out on the baby?
Right. Listen, the baby's not viable. How do you know the baby feels pain? Or at what point does the baby feel pain? Because a lot of these questions are being answered by science, right? We now know that babies feel pain in the first trimester. Because that's been one of the major arguments in my lifetime. Like, okay, but we can only allow it in the first trimester because at that point, it's not fully formed, doesn't feel pain. And then the more science tells us, we have states like Ohio that went to the heartbeat pill. So it's a human being. So Ben's like, why are you taking? So a crime was perpetrated on you, and your solution to the crime is to kill another human being. But again, like I said, we've made a lot of headway when we've been able to show women that it is a human being, because it's easy to do something if you don't have to face it, right? If you don't have to look reality in the face and say, that's a baby. It's just a thing.